Hello friends, this video is the start of a new series in which I'll be looking at different aspects of the Nancy Drew games and discussing their best and worst iterations per game. So for this video, I'll be going through each of the games in order and listing the best and worst second chance for each. This is entirely subjective and based on my own personal opinion. Best and worst are just good buzzwords for a clickbaity title. If you're not familiar with second chances, there's certain game over sequences in the Nancy Drew games in which when you fail, you can retry from a spot just before your fatal error by taking a second chance. Each game has multiple scripted second chances, which can range from being as zany and unexpected as getting devoured by a giant man-eating plant to being as mundane as failing to answer the phone in time. Second chances are one of the most memorable aspects of the Nancy Drew games and make the series stand out from other point-and-click adventure games. They've been called multiple monikers over the years, but Second Chance is the original and the catchiest, so that's what I'll be referring to them as throughout this video. Let me know your personal favorite second chance in the comments. Before we start, be warned that there will be both minor and major spoilers for all of the Nancy Drew games in this video, including the original version of Secrets Can Kill and the remastered version. Quick! Like this video in the next 5 seconds, or you'll get hit by a falling brick and have to restart the video over again. For the purposes of this video, I will be talking about Secrets Can Kill and Secrets Can Kill Remastered as separate entities. Although they share some second chances, they each have some unique ones. In my opinion, the two Secrets Can Kill games have some of the best second chances in the series. They all have incredibly high stakes and are as sensationally dramatic as Laurie Gerard. Certainly higher stakes than the ripeness of a tomato. The original 1998 Secrets Can Kill only has 3 second chances, but they are all bangers. Often literally. My personal favorite second chance is the one where Nancy gets shot in the head and dies. This happens if you're not proactive enough and fail to pick up the gun at the end of the game. The Nancy Drew wiki lists this second chance as allowing the villain to kill Nancy, insinuating that if you get the second chance, you're complicit in Nancy's murder. So that's good. I love all the second chances in this game, but if I were to choose one to let die in the boiler room explosion, it would be the gas leak second chance, which occurs if you don't replace the bolt cutters holding up the broken pipe with a soup ladle, which causes the diner to explode. Love that a soup ladle is the only thing standing between the staff and customers at Maxine's Diner and certain death. Secrets Can Kill Remastered shares a lot of second chances with the original game, such as the gas leak and the boiler room explosion. This game also adds a couple of new and exclusive second chances. The best new second chance is when Nancy enters the safe combination wrong and triggers Aunt Eloise's security system, which is a whole jail cell that drops out of the ceiling on top of her. I love the absolute drama of this security system and how absolutely unnecessary it is. I bet the guy who installed it thought, wow, there must be something really good in this safe. Gold, maybe, or jewels, or a letter written by Abraham Lincoln on the day of his death. But what's actually in there? A puzzle box, a key to the school library. Yeah, that's about it. Heaven forbid someone sneak into the library and steal all their priceless copies of Catcher in the Rye. This second chance is just so fun. It's one of those ones that I feel obligated to trigger whenever I replay Secrets Can Kill Remastered. The worst of the new second chances is when you set off the soda machine alarm in front of Connie and she tattles on Nancy. Where's the drama and danger of the other second chances? Nancy explodes the entire high school versus Nancy gets detention. They're not really on the same level. Much like the original Secrets Can Kill, Stay Tuned for Danger has a small amount of second chances, only 4. I have to pick the most iconic second chance of the game as my favorite, when the bomb explodes in Rick's dressing room. You're likely to get this second chance at least once a playthrough, unless you're looking at a walkthrough, because it occurs if you snip the wrong wire while attempting to disarm the bomb. Something I love about the early games is that there's just so many second chances where Nancy just clearly dies. The later games introduce the good news, bad news prompts, which usually emphasize that Nancy somehow survives seemingly life-threatening situations. In terms of worst second chance, I'm voting for pulling the fire alarm. This gets Nancy kicked off the case. Again, it's not that dramatic or interesting, it's more a case of, can I? Oh, I can. And it's just not explosive enough for me. You'll have to decide for yourself whether I mean that literally or not. Message in a Haunted Mansion marks the point in the series where Her Interactive really started to get creative with their second chances. There are a lot of good ones. Falling into the hole in the basement, accidentally on purpose dropping the chandelier, allowing Lewis to get away. However, the very best one, in my opinion, is allowing the house to burn down. Nancy discovers a fire in the sitting room and has to quickly put it out with a fire extinguisher, but if you fail to do so, you get this second chance. It's comical just how quickly the small fire contained within the cardboard box overwhelms the house, prompting Nancy to say mournfully, "It's too late." Much like Charlie, Nancy saying, "Fire!" lives rent-free. In comparison, the worst second chance is when Nancy tells Lewis she read about gumbo foo in a book, which triggers Lewis to realize Nancy was snooping in his briefcase, which then leads Rose to fire Nancy. "Rose, you hired me to investigate the mystery, and now you're sending me home for investigating the mystery. Make it make sense." I'm realizing that this is actually a really hard list to make, as there are just so many good second chances, and this is especially true about Treasure in the Royal Tower. Honorary mentions to both getting crushed by the elevator and falling down the elevator shaft. You both gave me many hours of amusement. I'm also realizing that so many of my favorite second chances are linked to iconic voice lines. "Hello, Rick," in Stay Tuned for Danger, "Fire," in Message in a Haunted Mansion, and "Well, well, well, look who returned to the scene of the crime," when Nancy gets caught snooping in Treasure in the Royal Tower. Dexter's delivery of that line and his disapproving face are just so memorable. Again, it's a second chance I feel obliged to trigger every time I replay that game. I think the least interesting second chance is when Nancy freezes to death when she gets locked outside the castle. Truly a whimper, not a bang moment, and I prefer my second chances to be bangs, if you know what I mean. There are sadly no potential explosions in the final scene, so I'm going to have to choose Nancy falling off the balcony as the best second chance. She's trying to reach a small gear, which has fallen onto the ledge just below the balcony, but if you don't have the right equipment, a magician's wand and a chewed-up wad of bubblegum, Nancy plummets towards the seats below. It's quite a comical moment as Nancy tumbles over the edge, shouting, "Whoa!" as she goes. Even though she almost definitely breaks her neck and dies, I still get a good chuckle out of it. The worst one is Nancy getting hit by the falling stage light. This one just has no flavor, and it's a variety of second chance that Her Interactive would come to reuse many times. Nancy notices something teetering above her and you have to quickly click out of the way to avoid getting bonked on the head. And in the final scene, it's not even an interesting object like a giant pufferfish. It's just a boring old stage light. Secret of the Scarlet Hand has a surprisingly small number of second chances. You'd think a game about Mayan history would be fertile ground for near-death experiences. For instance, Nancy could fall into a cenote and drown, or become some kind of blood sacrifice. But no. Of the second chances that are in the game, I think suffocating inside the monolith is my favorite. There's an almost romantic duality to Nancy suffocating to death on top of the Whisperer's mummy, who herself suffocated inside the monolith so many years ago. And the worst second chance in this game is when Nancy breaks her leg inside the temple. It's such a lame end to Nancy's story, having her break her leg right when she's so close to the end of the mystery, all because she neglected to bring a glow stick with her. This also feels like a precursor to the glow sticks in Curse of Blackmoor Manor, which are the bane of my existence, so I dislike this second chance for that reason too. Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake has a lot of great second chances. Or should I say, doggone great? Yeah? Most of this video is scripted, but I thought of that one on the spot. Pretty good, huh? Yeah? And a lot of explosive ones. In fact, my favorite one is when Nancy confidently takes off in the boat without fixing it properly, and we get a satellite view of the boat exploding in a ball of fire. Good stuff. Shout out to the rotten floorboards, which is a great comedic second chance. And to not putting out the shed fire, which prompts Ranger Stink to admonish you, an interesting prototype of the good news, bad news prompts, which wouldn't appear for 11 more games. I think the worst second chance is when Nancy confidently takes off in the boat without a life jacket and drowns. It's just a more boring version of not fixing the boat. My favorite second chance in the Haunted Carousel is one that I think many other people hold as a favorite, and that is forgetting to turn the iron off and burning down the hotel. It's such a dramatic interpretation of the butterfly effect, and again, how rapidly it happens just makes this second chance absolutely hilarious. The fact that Nancy is totally oblivious to the hotel burning down right behind her just adds to the comedic value of the moment. The worst second chance in the Haunted Carousel is any instance when Nancy gets electrocuted, mainly due to the high volume of these second chances within the game. It just feels a little lazy to reuse the second chance concept so many times in one game. It was one of the most difficult decisions of my life to choose a favorite second chance from Danger on Deception Island. There's so many good ones. The perils of biking without a helmet, Nancy kayaking into the fog, never to be seen again, and who could forget being arrested for catching 2 crabs? But I think the bad sandwich second chance is the absolute best. The ability to customize the sandwich that gives Nancy and/or Katie food poisoning makes the second chance all the more entertaining. Will you make Katie sick by feeding her a peanut butter and jellyfish sandwich? Or a sandwich which contains an entire jar's worth of expired mayonnaise and nothing else? Hours of entertainment. The worst second chance is another give Nancy head trauma second chance when she gets hit by a piece of debris falling off the lighthouse. I acknowledge that the culprit could have thrown that rock out of the lighthouse window, but it seems more likely that it's just part of the lighthouse that is degraded. We know the lighthouse is structurally unsafe, that's why there's fencing around it, and why Halt warns Nancy not to get too close. So the simplest explanation is that this is just an unfortunate accident, and a falling debris second chance is just that much more interesting when it feels intentional. Secret of Shadow Ranch has as many great and iconic second chances as the ranch's garden has unsatisfactory vegetables. My personal favorite is letting Shorty catch you at the end of the game. This guy, who's been a bit of a goof the whole game, is suddenly chilling, the stuff of nightmares. The worst second chance is, of course, when Nancy picks the wrong vegetables and Shorty kicks her off the ranch. It's so iconic that Her Interactive even made a merch design commemorating it. But I hate it. Please, Shorty, it's just a tomato. Her Interactive were really just on a roll with second chances at this point, as Curse of Blackmoor Manor is also stuffed full of incredible ones. I love giving Mrs. Drake a heart attack and killing Lulu the parrot by feeding her a bad cake, but I love seeing Nancy getting eaten by the giant carnivorous plant most of all. I get such delight out of seeing Nancy being gobbled up whole like she's a plate of bangers and mash, her mom-jeaned legs wriggling in terror. The worst second chance occurs if you open the door after solving the water puzzle, flooding the tunnel. It's not bad, but in a game full of memorable second chances, it's just the least interesting. In comparison to the previous 3 games, Secret of the Old Clock is pretty dull when it comes to second chances. There are only 4 in the whole game, a number that hadn't been so low since Stay Tuned for Danger came out in 1999. I'm going to say the best is when Nancy falls off the bridge trying to grab the receipt, but that just sounds so lame compared to Nancy gets devoured by a man-eating plant. But at least it's unexpected. Worst is definitely when Richard Topham catches you snooping if you don't placate Yuri, but what I'm most annoyed about is the blatant animal neglect rather than the second chance itself. How could you ignore this little face? The best second chance in Last Train to Blue Canyon comes right at the end of the game, when Nancy's riding a minecart full speed down the tracks. There are 5 points where Nancy can hit a wrong turn, and each of them leads to a different second chance. The variety is one of the things I love most about this second chance. Nancy can fall to her death, get stuck in the mine forever, be blown up by TNT, or get crushed by rocks. Obviously my favorite is when she gets blown up by TNT. Her could have so easily made the game over the same with every failure, but they didn't, and I really appreciate that. Also, I just love zany minecart rides. My least favorite second chance also occurs near the end of the game, where Nancy's attempting to remove the boards holding up the mine roof. If you do this wrong, the mine collapses, and Nancy is literally crushed to death by the weight of her failure. I think this one is the worst because it's quite likely to happen to you multiple times, especially if you try to work it out through trial and error rather than solving the puzzle like the game wants you to do. Watching a scene play out repetitively in quick succession can make even being crushed to death by rocks boring. For Danger by Design, I had the opposite problem than I had for most of the games on this list, in that I had trouble choosing my least favorite second chance, as there are quite a few that I'd nominate for that questionable honor. But before we discuss that, I have to say my favorite occurs when Nancy has to navigate the flooded tunnels under Paris in a wetsuit. If you're not careful, she can get caught in a large fan while exploring the tunnels, and, assumedly, gets mashed like a banana in a blender. We know by this point that there's something seriously wrong with me, and I like nothing better than to see Nancy get eviscerated. I think this might be because these games are ostensibly made for children, and it would have been so easy to just include tame second chances. For example, Nancy overbakes a cake. But instead the team at Her Interactive tried to be as extra as possible, so instead of overbaking a cake, Nancy burns down the whole kitchen if you have the oven on too high in Secret of Shadow Ranch. For the worst second chance in Danger by Design, I was debating between Nancy doesn't answer the phone in time for pure tedium and lack of inspiration, or the dark room puzzle for absolute visceral frustration. I think in the end I find the dark room puzzle most upsetting. At a certain point in the game, you need to develop photos to progress the story. The room you need to develop the photo in is pitch black, and if you click on the wrong part of the screen, you instantly explode. And 96% of the screen is the wrong part of the screen. They took the term dark room way too seriously, and as much as I love unnecessary explosions, they just stretched the limit of unnecessary with this one. My favorite second chance in Creature of Kapu Cave is simple yet dramatic, and that's when Nancy falls into the lava in the titular Kapu Cave. Anyone for Hawaiian barbecue? However, I feel like my real favorite second chance doesn't actually exist in the game. There really should be an opportunity for Nancy to be killed by the supposed creature, but no, there isn't. Literally, why is this game even called The Creature of Kapu Cave? I'm suing. The worst second chance is when you drown if you take too long searching for shells. Of all the ways to go, that's gotta be one of the most embarrassing and also boring. And sacrificing your life in the pursuit of Big Island bucks just isn't worth it. White Wolf of Icicle Creek naturally has many instances where Nancy can either freeze to death or perish in other snow-related accidents. However, probably predictably by this point, my favorite second chance in the game favors heat instead of cold. It's fishing for the mine and subsequently blowing up the ice fishing shack. Why are there so many mines in this remote Canadian lake? I'd like to see Nancy solve that mystery. My least favorite second chance in White Wolf is the one that you trigger by not solving the sauna puzzle in time. The culprit traps Nancy in the sauna with the heat cranked to dangerously hot levels, and Nancy has to fix the cold water pipe before she gets baked like a Pillsbury brand cinnamon roll. This puzzle is just so stressful, and there's so little time to complete it. Just thinking about it makes me sweaty. One of the highlights of Legend of the Crystal Skull is the tame alligator, Bernie. Bruno Boulet gained Bernie's affection by feeding him marshmallows. Every time Bruno went to feed Bernie, he'd knock a hollow log to get Bernie's attention. While out gathering mushrooms, Nancy accidentally bumps into this log, summoning Bernie. Disturbing him just this once doesn't bother Bernie, but hitting the log twice without relinquishing a single marshmallow drives Bernie into a frenzy, and he eats Nancy as if she were a very large jet puffed. See you later, alligator. The worst second chance occurs when Nancy gets stung too many times by wasps. At a certain point in the game, you have to collect kumquats to tempt a tame iguana named Iggy. But to do that, you first have to subdue a swarm of very angry wasps with a smoker gun. People who never played a Nancy Drew game think I'm insane listening to sentences like that. But wait. Guess what you do once you've got Iggy with you? You dress him up in little costumes. You can't dress him up as just the pirate. You have to dress him up as the postman, because he's gotta go retrieve a letter that was sent to the dead man. If you're not careful, Nancy will get stung. And if she gets stung too many times, she will have to go home. I don't know who told Her Interactive this was a fun minigame, because it isn't. But they obviously thought so, as it's in their next game, Phantom of Venice, as well. Phantom of Venice is the first game to use the good news, bad news format of second chances, which distinguished a whole era of Nancy Drew games. If you're not familiar with this format, it conveys second chances through an upside, aka good news, and a downside, aka bad news. Usually the good news is overridden by the bad news, or the bad news puts a dark spin on the supposed good news. In later games, these weren't just confined to good news and bad news, but also included facts, jokes, puns, and made-up idioms. There's also usually multiple good news, bad news prompts for each second chance. As an example, my favorite second chance in Phantom of Venice is when you let the culprit escape. To be fair, there is a second chance for this scenario in almost every Nancy Drew game. But I have a soft spot for Helena. She's the girl boss blueprint, and I simply think she deserves to be free. And most significantly, there's a chance to get this good news, bad news prompt when getting this second chance. The good news: the pigeons still like you. The bad news: the police, not so much. The pigeons like me. That's all I care about. By contrast, I once again do not like being stung by bees until I die. I think Her Interactive had a real bee in their bonnets at this point in time. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But seriously, why so many bees? It doesn't help that the bee smoking minigame is somehow even worse than in Legend of the Crystal Skull, with a deadly difficulty spike about the third time you attempt it. I have never been able to subdue all the bees at this point without feeling that I was on the verge of carpal tunnel syndrome. In terms of the best second chance in Haunting of Castle Malloy, I have one word for you: jetpack. Or is that two words? Jetpack. Anyway, there are 2 jetpack second chances. One for when you start the jetpack incorrectly, which causes it to explode, and another for if you venture too far out over the open ocean and run out of fuel, after which Nancy will fall into the water below. I personally prefer the latter second chance. It's fun to push the boundaries of the game and satisfying to realize that Her Interactive anticipated your actions and came up with a response. My least favorite is one I'm sure many of you also despise, and that's hecking up the chemical puzzle and exploding Nancy. It's like an evil version of the claw machines you find in arcades, in which if you slightly brush against a chemical, the entire country of Ireland will explode, and it will be all your fault. And it doesn't even make sense. One of the chemicals you have to sort is H2O, and I don't know about you, but I don't anticipate the possibility of being exploded to death every time I take a shower. There's a lot to dislike about Ransom of the Seven Ships, but in my opinion it still has a few redeeming qualities, such as my favorite second chance in the game. This occurs when you surface too quickly while scuba diving, causing Nancy to pass out. There are a few reasons why I think this second chance is successful. For one, it's set up effectively, with well-incorporated foreshadowing of the possibility of this happening. Additionally, it's realistic and teaches you an important safety precaution. I don't think anyone who triggered this second chance will ever forget the importance of surfacing slowly while scuba diving. The worst second chance can happen when Nancy is climbing up a cliff face. Get hit too many times by rocks thrown by a group of self-important monkeys, and Nancy will fall to her death. Pardon my language, but those monkeys, man. There are only 3 second chances in each of the next 2 games, Warnings at Waverly Academy and Trail of the Twister. I suspect the reason for this is that beginning with Waverly Academy, the Nancy Drew games had a new lead writer, Nick Blahunka, who probably wasn't used to incorporating second chances into game scripts, but I don't know that for sure. Despite the small amount of second chances, there is still one that is really good, and that is when Nancy is split in half by the pendulum axe at the end of the game. Life imitates art, with art in this case being The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. It's also got some fun good news, bad news prompts. The good news? You dodged the pendulum at the last second and escaped through a secret door. The bad news? Waiting on the other side of the door was another pendulum. The good news? The pendulum missed you and crashed through the wall. The bad news? Waiting for you on the other side of the wall? Angry bears. The least interesting second chance is when you rack up too many demerits and Nancy gets expelled. For one, it's a lot more mundane than reenacting a scene from an Edgar Allan Poe story with fatal consequences. And for another, it actually takes quite a lot of work to trigger. You likely won't encounter the second chance in a regular playthrough of Waverly Academy unless you're a total rebel who eats rules for breakfast like Fruit Loops. I like to feel that there's danger lurking around every corner when I'm playing a Nancy Drew game, and I never know when it's going to strike. Like Warnings at Waverly Academy, there are only 3 second chances in Trail of the Twister, and as you might expect for a game about storm chasing, 2 of them involve getting caught in a storm. My personal favorite is when Nancy gets swirled up by a twister. This can happen in 2 different circumstances. Either you accidentally or intentionally drive into the path of a storm, or if you leave the storm shelter before the tornado has passed. My least favorite second chance is the only one that doesn't involve storms. One of the features of Trail of the Twister, which I've already alluded to, is being able to drive around in a little car, causing chaos and many traffic accidents. However, if you hit too many other cars, Nancy will get into a more serious accident, which results in a second chance. Do you know how many car accidents occur in the United States every day? Approximately 17,000. Do you know how many people are involved in tornado accidents every year in the United States? 1,500. Which is honestly more than I expected, but still. I play video games for the escapism. If I wanted to get into a car accident, I'd just go outside. Shadow at the Water's Edge is another game full of memorable second chances. For example, getting mauled by Suki, the robotic cat. But I think the ultimate second chance can occur towards the end of the game, when the ghost is attempting to drown Nancy by holding her underwater in the bath. Nancy is hampered by a complex net, which she has to cut using a short katana before she runs out of oxygen. However, as the oxygen leaves her brain, it's very easy to become overwhelmed and not saw through the correct ropes in time, in which case the Yurei drowns Nancy, and presumably she becomes yet another ghost haunting the Ryokan. The worst second chance does not happen after being murdered by a ghost or a robotic cat, but when you make a social faux pas. Early on in the game, Nancy acquires a mysterious article written in Japanese. She can ask every character in the game about this article, which turns out to be about the death of Kasumi, so depending on who she's speaking to, either their daughter, mother, or potential mother-in-law. Naturally, none of them react well to having their loved one's death literally shoved in their face by a stranger. Miwako acts most strongly of all, going so far as to kick Nancy out of the Ryokan, which I think is a fair reaction. However, even after you encounter this second chance, the option to show Miwako the article still remains. It's just insulting considering how easy it is to misclick and find yourself taunting Miwako about her dead mother again. The Captive Curse is a Nancy Drew game that's often underrated, and the second chances are one of the most underrated aspects of the game, as this game has a second chance which is truly ikonisch, as they say in Germany. If you pull the lever in the passage to the courtyard, the one marked DANGER in big, obvious letters, the portcullis will rapidly lower and Nancy will get staked by it. Love how her interactive keep thinking up new and inventive ways to brutally kill Nancy. My least favorite second chance represents a trend in second chances in the newer games. More and more often you'll see second chances which occur if you get caught snooping by one of the other characters. Boy oh boy does this game have a lot of them. The worst one of all is the one which triggers if you get caught snooping in Renata's bag, aka drop a pencil the wrong way and wake her up. I hate this puzzle in general, it's just so illogical and frustrating. Just take the bag and run, Nancy. No one knows for sure where Nancy Drew's hometown of River Heights is located, but the general consensus is that it's somewhere in the Midwest. If River Heights is located in Missouri, for example, we could have had a version of Alibi and Ashes, where Nancy gets the death penalty as a second chance. At the very least, I think there should have been a second chance where Nancy gets a life sentence, as Alibi and Ashes is notably the game where Nancy goes to jail. But as there are no second chances of that nature in the actual game, I will settle for the second chance in which Nancy opens one of the doors of the town hall and gets toasted like a marshmallow on a campfire. This is another second chance in which I was influenced by a notably enjoyable good news, bad news prompt. The bad news: you were engulfed in flames. The good news: you had the presence of mind to yell, "Oh no, I'm being engulfed in flames!" Which has to be in the top 10 greatest last words of all time. Alibi and Ashes is another Nancy Drew game which has a lot of snooping second chances. I like getting caught snooping by Tony least of all, because, well, it's Tony. I already get the sense that if she were elected, she would try her darndest to get the death penalty reinstated if River Heights is located in, say, Illinois, just so she could sentence Nancy to death for mildly annoying her with her detective antics. In my opinion, Tomb of the Lost Queen is not a very memorable Nancy Drew game. However, I was actually a little surprised I didn't remember any of the second chances while researching for this video, as it turns out that, just like the ice creams at Scoop, these second chances have both variety and flavor. How could I have forgotten Nancy getting fatally bitten by a snake, or Nancy getting sprayed with lethal poison after doing the final puzzle wrong? The one that intrigued me the most is caused by drinking 7 cups of water. What could be the consequence of such a thing? Perhaps Nancy is kept too busy peeing to solve the mystery, or the other people at the Tomb of the Lost Queen get annoyed at her for drinking all the water. If you guessed either of those things, you would be wrong. No, if you drink 7 cups of water, Nancy will die. Maybe there is such a thing as being too hydrated. What the hell was that line delivery? Honestly, most of the second chances in this game are just so strong, I'm going to have to be boring and say the worst is just another snooping second chance when Lily catches you snooping. You think you're original, Lily? Well, you're not. Although The Deadly Device isn't one of my favorite Nancy Drew games, I can admit that it has a lot of great second chances, including multiple opportunities for Nancy to get both blown up and electrocuted. Not at the same time, though. Probably the best one is when Nancy gets electrocuted by the Tesla coil if she exits the control booth during the high power test. You really have to be intentionally dumb to die in this way, but that's part of the fun of second chances. They make you want to trigger them, just because they're so over the top and entertaining. The Nancy Drew games are the only games I can think of where I'd want to purposefully trigger a game over. But what's the second chance in this game that I'd want to avoid triggering? Okay, let me have one more worst snooping second chance. When Nancy is caught snooping in Nico's office, because I think this one has a funny joke attached to it, which I'm sure will be consolation to Nancy in her failure. What do you call a detective who gets caught snooping? Unemployed! Haha. Funny, Nancy, don't you agree? Remember the good news, bad news prompts? Yeah, well, they're gone now, as of Ghost of Thornton Hall. I don't know whether to treat this as a good thing or a bad thing. They certainly defined an era of Nancy Drew games, but they could get a little irritating, especially when you continuously failed at a puzzle and had the same 3 lines of text thrown into your face over and over. They began to feel more mocking than cute or funny. Anyway, although Ghost of Thornton Hall has quite a few good second chances, I definitely think there could have been a lot more. I want to get ghost murdered at every opportunity. Therefore, my favorite second chance in this game involves Nancy getting ghost murdered when she digs in the wrong spot in the tunnel, or, as the Nancy Drew wiki puts it, when Nancy is exposed to fumes. I just want you all to know that I could have chosen getting caught snooping in Clara's briefcase for the worst second chance in this game, but I'm not. Instead, I'm voting for when Nancy gets hit in the head by a piece of wood when she, to quote the wiki, lingers too long on a stack of debris. How is that worthy of warranting a second chance? Also, if something has to fall on Nancy, I'd much rather it be a scythe than a piece of wood. The best second chance in The Silent Spy is garbage. And I mean that literally. This second chance happens if you dawdle while attempting to escape the trash compactor, and Nancy and Zoe get crushed to death. Yeah, that's a thing that happens in The Silent Spy. Sometimes I forget how wild that game is. The worst second chance is a lot less weird and exciting. It's when you linger in Zoe's room too long and she comes back from hanging out in the hotel sauna or whatever and catches you snooping. It makes situations like unlocking her phone very stressful, as you really don't have enough time to complete the puzzle before Zoe bursts in and forces you to start all over again. I'm a big fan of second chances, which bring something new to the second chance table, and don't just replicate ones we've seen hundreds of times before, and the Shattered Medallion does just that. The second chance I'm referring to occurs when the earthquake simulator gets turned on while Nancy is inside it. You have to quickly duck under the table lest you get hit in the head by the lamp and die. It's original, and it's another educational second chance, teaching how important it is to take cover during an earthquake in a more impactful way than a school earthquake drill. I think the worst second chance is when Nancy fails the sudden death match, allowing Kiri to win the game. This is a very meta second chance. If you lose the game, you'll lose the game. This one isn't necessarily bad, but it's always disappointing to get so close and then fail at the last moment. Also, by this point, you'll probably be sick of the Shattered Medallion and not want to start this puzzle over again. I think the theater production team in Labyrinth of Lies is violating some sort of safety code, as there are so many opportunities to initiate dangerous second chances. For example, my favorite can occur while exploring the underground set. At a certain point, Nancy triggers something which sets a large boulder rolling perilously towards her. If you don't step out of the way of the boulder in time, Nancy will get squashed to death. Luckily, she won't have to go far, because she's already in the underworld. The worst second chance in this game is perhaps the second chance which caused me the most physical pain. At the end of the game, there's a seed sorting puzzle. The actual puzzle isn't so bad. What makes it so awful is that it's timed. If you don't complete the puzzle fast enough, the floor will collapse beneath Nancy, dumping her into a pit of fire. Yeah, something tells me this isn't to code. Furthermore, if you make a save partway through the puzzle hoping to at least recover some of your progress, if you then reload that save after your death, her snatches the floor out from beneath you again, metaphorically this time, as the game doesn't actually save your progress at all, but sets you right back at the start of the puzzle. Falling into the fire is appropriate, as this feels like hell. Sea of Darkness is the 32nd game in the Nancy Drew series, so it's impressive that it manages to innovate with at least one of its second chances, rather than just rehashing previously utilized ones. It is this second chance which I'm nominating as the best in the game. When you take too long attempting to open the lighthouse hatch when all the windows are open, and Nancy freezes to death. I think the specificity of this one is what makes it great. It feels very particular to Sea of Darkness and its location, and even if you removed it from the context of this game, it would still be easy to identify as coming from Sea of Darkness. Sorry, I lied about the snooping second chance from the Deadly Device being the last snooping second chance on this list. The real last one comes when Elizabeth catches you snooping in her bag. The contents of her bag aren't even interesting enough to warrant a second chance in my opinion. She's no Simone from the final scene, that's all I'm saying. There seems to be a pattern that whenever a big change occurs in the series, the amount of second chances are pared back, as Midnight in Salem has only 3. As my own self-imposed video format forces me to pick one as the best, I'm going to opt for the second chance at the end of the game, which occurs if you dawdle while escaping from the tunnels, which fill up with water and cause Nancy and May to drown. It's a bit of a low-effort second chance, but it at least feels somewhat novel. I mean, it's not someone catching you snooping. The worst is a little easier to choose. Messing up the hecking Zodiac floor puzzle and letting Nancy, Deirdre, and the Hardy Boys get crushed by the house. I'll just kill off all my favorites in one go, okay, yeah, sure. Okay, no, it's fine, I'm fine. No, it's been 4 years without a new Nancy Drew game. I'm not fine. I've got to wrap this up quickly before Zoe comes in and catches me, so thank you for watching, and please like, subscribe, and comment your favorite second chance. There's a lot to dislike about Ransom of the Seven... Ransom of the Seven... Oh my god, please.